Testing. Hi there, guys. My name is Ron Biv, and today we are gonna be talking about how automotive steering works. We're gonna be talking about how automotive steering works. But in order to know how steering works, we have to first learn the physics of how steering works. In order to learn the physics of how steering works, we have to know the physics of how a wheel works. So let's say we're turning or we're driving. We're just driving, okay? And we make a turn, okay? So when we make a turn, okay? So in order to first understand how we do the whole turning thing, we have to first understand the physics of the wheel, okay? So in order for the vehicle to turn or move at all, the wheel and the ground and the velocity has to be zero. Okay, the velocity of the wheel has to be zero. But how? So when moving, there are two types of velocities: translation and rotational. The translation and the rotational one. The rotational to move this way, top rotational and the bottom rotational. So when we move that to the bottom, okay, it cancels it out. It cancels each other out, creating hence zero velocity. Okay, that's just when you're moving in a perfect straight line. But let's say we take a turn, okay? We steer. So when we steer, the rotational movement will also steer. But the translation velocity does not. And since it does not, these two won't basically cancel out each other, hence causing the car to skid. Okay? But in order for this to work, the whole car has to turn, basically. So that would mean in order for the car to fully turn, both of the steering wheels have to basically meet a certain point at the rear end of the vehicle. So let's say we have the whole car. This is the rear wheels, okay? We make a line. And if we have the angle of the steering wheels, we move them here, there would be a point of connection here. This is how steering works. But if you notice here, the angles of the wheels are different. Hence, the different angles makes a perfect turn. And this is actually called the principle of steering. So now that we know the physics, well, how do we even actually turn in a vehicle? Okay, so here we have the steering wheel, here we have the rods. So that's part one, physics. Part two, and how it works. So we first have to, this is the pinion and rack system as we see here. So let's say we turn, it moves this shaft, okay, and at the very end of it, there's a pinion. The pinion collides with the rack, okay, this bar here. And they're basically these teeth, and when you move the pinion, the rack moves. When you turn it, the rack moves side by side, and it's specifically placed like this to only move side by side. It is then connected to a tie rod, okay, which is connected to the arm. And the arm basically allows the steering wheel to turn from side to side, okay? And in order for it to turn side and side, it uses a roller bearing, which only makes the arm turn, connected to the wheel, okay? So now that we know how it works, so then when we turn, this is how the steering wheel turns. And if we turn it, now you will see that the wheels are at different angles, hence making the principle of steering true, hence allowing to make a perfect steer. But nowadays, in most modern cars, we use power steering to make steering a bit more easier, because the version you're seeing here is manual steering. So how does power steering work? So here is the mechanism for power steering. It is mostly placed right over here, and what it does, here are all the parts for it. So it all starts with the ECU, so the ECU here, okay, is like this circuit board. And what it does is it basically calculates the torque torque applied by the driver, the steering angle, okay, the steering wheel speed and the vehicle speed, and it calculates it all to give the specific amount of torque, and it sends that specific instructions to the BLDC motor, and then the motor will spin, turning the worm screw on this worm gear, basically giving it the torque, okay, making driving or making just steering more easy, okay. But what happens in the situation that a motor fail happens? If that happens, you see, the problem with worm screws is that when you turn the worm screw and the worm gear, when you turn the worm screw, the worm gear will move. But if you try to move the worm gear and to make the worm screw move, it won't work, okay? Hence causing it to jam, and we can't steer, right? So how are we going to steer? Well, and just in that case, it uses there is inside of the worm gear, there's a planetary gear set. So the shaft is connected to the sun gear, which is connected by planet gears, by an outer gear. Okay, so let's say we can't turn since, well, the DC motor is jammed. Okay, it in a power failure. Okay, it cannot move. When we turn the sun gear, it turns the planet gears. Okay, which means it allows for rotation. Hence, hence it is a backup way to go back into manual driving, okay? And that's basically how automated steering works. And that's basically it. Thank you for watching this video. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye!